Hello everyone, it's SpawnPoiint and this is the 13-inch M2 MacBook Air, Apple's smallest and newest MacBook in 2022. But how does it compare to what we've seen before, and is it really worth buying? Well, I've been using it for the last 2 weeks. I even edited last week's and today's video entirely on this MacBook, and I wanted to give you my thoughts on its usability, size, screen, features, and of course value for money. So we'll get this unboxed and take a closer look at what this MacBook Air has to offer. And today's video is sponsored by Polyarc and their new VR game called MacBook 2. There's a link below if you wish to check it out, but I will explain more on this later. Okay, so here's the box, which is pretty plain as we've come to expect from Apple. We've got the MacBook Air branding on one side here, and then on the top it just shows the side profile of the Air. Inside we have the 13-inch MacBook Air, the cardboard sleeve containing some paperwork and 2 Apple stickers. And then we've got the braided USB-C to MagSafe charging cable. And finally, we've got the power brick and the plug. So the one that I've got here is a 35-watt charger, but you can also buy a 67-watt if you want to. Now, over the last few years, we have seen the design slightly change on each release of the Pro or the Air models, but this time the Air has adopted the overall thicker look from last year's Pro. It's got the rounded edges and a more smoother look, and on first impressions, this is noticeably chunkier than what we've seen before from the Air releases, but that's only because it's not tapered and it's the same thickness from the front to the back. In fact, this MacBook Air is thinner overall than the previous version. But this year, we've also now got 4 colours to choose from. So we've got the original silver and space grey, then they've dropped the gold and introduced midnight and starlight. And that's the one that I've gone for. I wasn't sure how this would look, but on first impressions, I really like the look of this. It's actually light enough that it could almost pass as the silver colour, but in the right light, you can see a very small hint of gold. It looks pretty fresh, especially with that large Apple logo on the lid, but here it is compared to my space grey MacBook Pro that I've got as well. And it's only when you compare the two side by side, you can see the starlight really does have that hint of gold. And flipping it over, you'll see we've got some large rubber feet to stop it sliding around on your desk, but there's also no branding on the bottom of this laptop. Whereas on last year's Pro, we had MacBook Pro etched into the bottom, which was a really nice touch. Now, the reason I'm surprised by this on the Air is there's also no MacBook Air branding on the front. So when you open the lid now, you will not see MacBook Air written below the screen. Now, there's a few reasons you would go for the MacBook Air over the Pro, and one of those reasons is the overall size and portability, as this is the smallest MacBook that you can buy right now. And using it for the last couple of weeks, I've realised just how easy it is to use a laptop this small. Being able to pick it up one-handed, move it around the house, and work from anywhere is really convenient. The size of this is definitely one of the biggest reasons to go for an Air. And going back to my 16-inch MacBook Pro, after using this feels stupidly big, heavy, and bulky. It's really made me question why I'm using this laptop. Just look at how much thicker and bigger the MacBook Pro 16 looks compared to the Air. It is an absolute beast. But if portability is a concern and a deciding factor, you really cannot go wrong with the Air. And as for the screen, it has really impressed me over the last couple of weeks. It's got a liquid retina display and 500 nits of brightness, so it is brighter than what we've seen before. It's great to see that the edges are almost borderless as they've taken it right up to the case, but it has also adopted the notch at the top. Now, that's not a huge issue once you've used it for a few hours. You kind of forget that it's even there. Then inside this notch, it's got the front-facing 1080p FaceTime camera, and that has been upgraded from the 720p that we've seen before. Now, the brightness of 500 nits has been absolutely fine for viewing indoors. It's only when using it outside that it becomes a slight issue. But that's a combination of the 500 nits and that glossy screen, so it's still viewable, but a little brighter would be perfect. And as for the screen quality, well, this thing looks great. Editing photos and videos on here, even just watching videos on YouTube, all look crisp and vibrant. There's no denying it, the Retina display does a great job at producing those awesome colours. But it is worth noting though that this is only a 60Hz screen. So it's not got the new 120Hz ProMotion display that we've seen on the Pro models. So you are getting a smaller screen and lacking a couple of features from the Pro. But another thing about the 13-inch MacBook Air is of course the screen size and the screen real estate. So this depends on what you'll be using it for or how you wish to use it, but if you're editing photos, writing documents, browsing the web, or even watching videos online, you will be absolutely fine. But when it comes to editing videos on here, especially full time, I have found it to be slightly too small. The overall space you get on the screen or the real estate just isn't quite enough to comfortably work on. I have actually caught myself constantly leaning in or zooming in to see what I'm editing, which does make it harder to work on. Now, if you're using this docked or you've plugged it into another screen for projects like this, then there are zero issues with a screen of this size. I've had it plugged into my 40-inch ultra wide on my desk and it looks great. It also scales really nicely as well. But if I was to use this for editing all of my future videos on without an external display, I know that I would struggle and it would definitely slow my workflow down. But of course, it doesn't help that I have got used to the 16-inch screen and I am using a 40-inch most days. And for a quick comparison, here is the 11-inch iPad Pro alongside the 13-inch MacBook Air. And finally, we've got the 16-inch MacBook Pro. You can instantly see just how much extra screen you're getting on the 16. But with that comes a huge laptop that you need to carry around. It's the whole iPhone Pro versus Pro Max debate. Do you need the extra screen space? For me, the Air really is the perfect balance between these two sizes. Right, so spec-wise, I've got the 8-core CPU with a 10-core GPU, 16GB of memory, and a 1TB SSD. So this is not the base spec that I've got here, but it has got a few extras thrown in. But over the last 2 weeks of using this daily, it's really surprised me at just how good it is. That new M2 chip means it's done a decent job of handling all of my usual tasks. Doing some light editing of photos in Photoshop and Lightroom, no issues at all. It runs smooth, doesn't throttle, crash, or lag, and the software opens quickly, and I've usually got 5 or 6 apps open at the same time. The same goes for browsing online or writing documents. As you would expect, the Air can handle pretty much any day-to-day task that you throw at it. Now, the biggest test for me was editing videos in Final Cut Pro. If it was going to see any kind of slowdown or throttling, this was going to be it. Well, I've edited 2 videos on here now, so you've got last week's gaming monitor review and this video today. And throughout these 2 videos, I've had absolutely no issues with the Air keeping up. It scrubs through my 4K footage effortlessly. It's never dropped a frame or stuttered. This isn't rendered footage either. This is dropped straight into the timeline and edited and played straight from here. I definitely came into this with expectations that the M2 Air could not keep up with my MacBook Pro, but this has pleasantly surprised me. And the fact that the MacBook Air doesn't come with fans, it actually doesn't get particularly hot during normal use. Now, when it comes to exporting in Final Cut Pro, this is when I definitely saw a slowdown. It is noticeably slower than what I'm used to on the M1 Max, but then it's quicker than my old Intel MacBook Pro. So I went ahead and exported the same project on both the M1 Max Pro as well as this M2 Air, and these were the times that it took to complete, and this was a 5GB file. So it's quite a big difference between the two, but that's kind of expected. So the M2 chip puts it higher than the M1 that we saw a couple of years ago, but it's still a lower spec than the M1 Pro and the M1 Max chips that we see in the Pro models. And a quick word about today's sponsor, Polyarc. So if you follow me for a while, you'll already know that I'm massively into gaming. I often show PlayStation and Xbox stuff here on the channel, but I've always wanted to get into VR. Well, that's where MacBook 2 comes in, this awesome new VR game from Polyarc. You play as this little mouse called Quill, where you can explore the world, manipulate the environment, interact, and engage with the weapon inventory. The sound design and visuals of this game are absolutely stunning, and it's probably one of the most beautiful VR games out there. Playing through the story and listening to the narration gives you a real sense of immersion and connection too. It's not like anything else that I've played before. Now, if you've not played the first, don't worry, you can jump straight in, but this is a sequel. Now, it was originally released on PSVR, which was a huge success, but is now available on Meta Quest 2, and is packed with the gameplay and graphics optimization with this new release. Playing on Quest 2 also means you're able to use a 2-controller setup, which provides a more natural feeling to explore more freely. So if you want to know more about this awesome VR game from Meta Quest 2, click the link below and download it today. You can actually get both of these games as part of a bundle called the Moss Series Pack, and at the moment it's 20% off, but that's only until August the 4th. So looking at the ports, which I think for a 2022 laptop is still lacking. It only comes with 2 Thunderbolt 4 USB-C ports, and they are both on one side. Now, that's not a huge issue, but once you've docked it and you've plugged in, say, an external drive, well, you're done. An extra 1 or 2 would be useful, as for example, when I record my audio, I also need to plug my microphone in. So you might have noticed that we've also got the MagSafe connector now on the Air, which is a nice addition. This just clicks onto the side and means if you do knock it while you're charging, it will pop right off. Although if you pull it sideways across your desk, it won't disconnect and it will just slide it across your table. You do need to pull it up to release it. Then around the other side, we have the 3.5mm headphone jack, which also supports high impedance headphones. I've always got my Sony headphones plugged in while I'm editing videos, so I hope we never lose this port. Now obviously there's no HDMI or SD card slot, as that's reserved for the Pro models. And typing on the keyboard is great, the keys feel responsive, and the travel is pretty much perfect for a low profile keyboard. In fact, this video today was completely written and scripted on the M2 MacBook Air. It's backlit too, so if you're typing at night or on a low lit environment, you can obviously still see what you're doing. Then across the top, we've got the usual function keys, and on the right side, we've got the Touch ID button, which is also the power button. And as for the trackpad, well, this is just as awesome as all the previous MacBook Pros and MacBook Airs. It's got that pressure sensing control, and it's really precise when using it as a mouse. Okay, so most of the time I'm either using my headphones or my AirPods, but let's talk about the audio on the Air. So it's now packing a 4-speaker setup, which is a step up from the stereo setup that we've had before. The overall quality of this sound is good, especially coming from a laptop this small. Now they do lack any kind of bass that you might have wanted or expected to hear. They're pretty flat in terms of the low end, but the quality and the clarity is really good. Take a listen to this and see what you think.
This is a multi-year journey you're about to embark on. Who's your best friend?
Nikki.
Spandex. Spandex is your best friend.
Now I've easily got an entire day's use out of this before needing to charge, and that's from 100% down to about 30%. The Air has always been incredible at battery life, and this one is no different. So it's rated at up to 18 hours of use and around 15 hours of wireless web browsing. This will heavily reduce depending on the task that you're doing, so video editing for example will reduce that further. But I have found a full day of editing in Final Cut Pro, tweaking a few photos and browsing online, I easily saw 8 hours. Now the rated 15 to 18 hours of normal use is 2 to 3 days depending on how you're using it, but that's absolutely awesome for most people. It does come with a 35 watt charger in the box, but you can upgrade that to the 67 watt charger during checkout. Okay, so you're interested in buying the Air, but how does it stack up against the Pro models? Well, let's start with the advantages of the Air over the Pro. So it's cheaper, smaller, lighter, and has a slightly better battery life. It's also available in those 2 extra colours. And then there's the Pro models. Well, we know it's bigger, thicker, and more expensive and heavier, but they also have a bigger and brighter screen, that 120Hz ProMotion display, and an HDMI port and the SD card slot. They also have the option for the M1 Pro and the M1 Max chips, as well as internal fans. So intensive loads and editing and exporting won't be an issue at all. So if you want the biggest screen that you can get, well, you need to go for the Pro. If you want it to be as fast as possible, again, the Pro model is probably best suited. But if it's cost and portability that you're after, well, you cannot really beat the Air. Now, I've already mentioned the spec that I've got here, but this is not the cheapest option available right now. So if you wanted the entry-level MacBook Air, it's going to cost you £1,249. That's already a £250 increase over the previous Air. The spec that I have here comes in at £1,949, which puts that £50 more than the entry-level 14-inch MacBook Pro. But ultimately the question is the 2022 M2 MacBook Air worth buying? Well, for me this seems to be the perfect all-rounder. It's small, powerful, has decent battery life, and it's one of the cheapest options available right now. If you're wanting something portable that you don't need to be editing 8K or even 4K content on a daily basis, this is a brilliant laptop. It will handle most things you throw at it. However, if you're looking to be using it for more creative work, like video editing or animation, you might want to look at the 14-inch MacBook Pro. I mean, once you start speccing the Air like I have with the more memory and cores, you might as well just go for the base spec 14-inch Pro. Otherwise, the entry MacBook Air is absolutely fine for most people. I could happily use this on a day-to-day basis. Now, if you drop an Apple symbol with the word Air in the comments, I will give you a thumbs up for staying right to the end. And if you did enjoy today's video, check out my other MacBook Pro videos next, as they cover both the 14-inch and the 16-inch versions. Thanks for watching, please like, sub, and follow me on Instagram and Twitter. Until next time.